everyone. Thank you, SMA, for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to pick up on a programme of public archaeology that ran for a decade at the Archaeological Archive at the Museum of London that I last spoke about in 2012, I think, at Manchester. And the totality of this programme's never really been published, spoken about, and I think it's absolutely fantastic public archaeology. I'm really proud of it, and I want to share it here, and it's going to pick up on loads of things people have been talking about today. And just a quick trigger warning, there's a couple of images of human remains here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the London Archaeological Archive and Research Centre, or the Archaeological Archive at the Museum of London. Okay, that's when I was there. Of course, it's not called that now. We're now London Museum and London Museum Stores, in which the Archaeological Archive is situated, and currently closed because there's this massive redevelopment going on, probably one of the largest museum redevelopments in Europe. So I can't comment on anything about that now. If you have questions around that, please get in touch with the archive. I'm here to celebrate what I did in my capacity during that time. Okay. If you're not familiar with the archive, bit of history. Opened in 2002. There'd been a suspension on taking in archives. That massive storage issue. So this is one of the solutions, was creating the archive at Mortimer Wheeler House. I think about a 5-year development, and ended up, as I say, at Mortimer Wheeler House on the Regent's Canal there. This is actually the back of the building, but you get a sense of the size. The remit being both central London, but out to the greater boroughs as well, although you do get local collecting institutions across London. So a massive remit. Those are the numbers I had when I started working there in 2008. They've massively gone up. And if you want to include all the undeposited archaeology, you know, that large units and small, some molars, the PCAs out there have, it's absolutely huge. It's vast. So it still retains its title, I think, of world's largest archaeological archive, which it was awarded. I'm going to be talking about a programme of public engagement work. And as I'm doing this, you've got to remember there was a small core team who are making the archive function, and it pretty much stayed around these 5 posts. It might have fluctuated a little bit. A small team really that are looking after masses and masses of archaeology. Something my line manager, or the archive manager at the time, Francis Grew, put together. It's really important. Might seem quite simple, and I'm going to be really focusing on the reaching out today. And this is really important because of how the public can recognise and place importance in this. I'm going to touch on this in the conclusion. I'm talking about a certain programme that ran for a decade, but I do want to flag that before I joined in 2008 with this programme, the archive had already been doing really innovative stuff, actually, with public outreach and how it was using its collections, and we took it to another level, I suppose. So, LARC opens. There's a couple of projects that informed what was the volunteer inclusion programme. So we had a minimum standards project, and we had the archive volunteer learning project. And after an internal review, it was found both these projects prioritised either collections or people, not to the detriment, but they prioritised one over the other. So after an internal review of these 2 programmes, when I joined in 2008 and worked with my then colleague Adam Corsini, we created volunteer inclusion programme that put both of these things on the same level. People weren't more important than real work on the collections, and the collections weren't more important than the people. And this is something we took throughout the next 10 years. So that was funded by MLA back in the day, and it kind of worked so well. We were able to continue it. It morphed, it changed. I'm going to talk about that evolution. And we had the Opening Up Archaeology programme. So this is quite unique, because essentially we took a project and those people, me and Adam, and it expanded. So we have 10 continuous years of developing, building, and that continuity of staff. So that's something quite special, really, even though the 2 are distinct. And that latter one was funded by Arts Council. Here we go, more of these pictures, seen some of these today. So we focused on what we called legacy archives. So legacy archives to us were archives that did not meet the current depositional standards. That's a sliding scale, and we always started at this end of the scale. So we worked on a lot of 1970s excavations to bring them up to better standard. You've just heard from Gemma talking about the space saved, and Sam, you know, what you can find, the space you can save, really big impact. And what I'm not going to put up, there are lots of slides about the impact on the collections, on focusing on the people, but those numbers are out there and it's absolutely massive, huge amounts of space saving and generating greater access to the collection, which we've heard about today. So what was the volunteer inclusion program? I've got lots to rattle through. If you really want to know about this and the model we created, I'd say read the thing I wrote for the SMA back in 2012, the proceedings. So it developed from these two previous projects. There was this absolute balance on people and collections, and we projectized our volunteering. There used to be a model of volunteers would come in and there was no end point to what they were doing. They just came in, and they were fantastic, but they never stopped, and there wasn't any way to really bring in new volunteers, new blood. It was all about projectizing, bringing these projects to an end, but also evolving that to create projects that could then, take them further. They'd learned all these brilliant skills, but how could we place them onto different things? And we found 10 weeks projects work the best. We played around for ages, and we found 10-week projects work the best in terms of people not getting saturated and learning and reaching their peak points, I suppose. Running 3 of these a year, individuals volunteering 1 day a week in groups of 6, and having 3 to 4 teams a week. So a huge number of volunteers coming through the archive in these projectized roles. They were inclusive teams. So sort of Headley mentioned Tony Blair earlier. We had sort of this phrase, the socially excluded, came out with New Labour. And that was the remit. The funding remit was to engage the socially excluded, and we flipped that on its head and we talked about social inclusion. It was about bringing people together. But the most important thing is we diversified our recruitment sources. We didn't let the volunteers come to us, where you will probably get traditional volunteers, by which I mean perhaps retirees because they have time, or students because they're active, thinking and want experience. We diversified and we went out and brought people to us. And then we mixed those people. We put them together in very diverse teams. And I think this is a real success of the project. And in terms of what those people were learning beyond the archaeological knowledge of this social nature and bringing different people together. So yeah, it was that balance of skill, and again, putting them on a level. The museological knowledge, the archive and archaeology knowledge was as important as the transferable skills we were trying to build up as well. We had weekly workshops with either curator or archaeology specialists. The Mortimer Wheeler House also houses the archaeological unit MOLA, so their main London office, and been there for a long time. And it also has the Museum of London's other reserve stores. So you've got a whole basement ground floor of social working history. So there's a real mix in that building, but we're very lucky to be able to draw on the archaeological unit MOLA, who used to be intimately connected with London Museum. You may know this. So we drew on them, and also, of course, our curatorial colleagues over at London Wall, the site the museum's currently moving out of. And this was all meaningful work. So this was not volunteers coming in and doing what they wanted to do, or we found them a job, a bit like when we improved the work experience program to give something to the work experience. We didn't really mean much. Everything was meaningful. Everything had an impact, improving real collections. And that is something that runs throughout what I'm talking about today. And we created this adaptable model that anyone could pick up. And indeed, the Natural History Museum picked it up. Their Darwin Centre, if you've ever been there, wasn't working. It wasn't doing what they planned to do with the Darwin Centre. So they turned it over to volunteers. They came to us, saw us, wanted to use our model with natural science collections. And I don't know if you know the Darwin Centre, you've got this sort of glass screen, and it's supposed to be, this is where all the curators and people are going to work behind, and the public will come up a bit like a zoo and watch them. And nobody wanted to do this in the museum. So they filled it with volunteers using this model of how you work for the collections. And they said after that internally, as soon as people saw how it could work and how the public reacted to that, then curators and specialists wanted to be behind the screen and work. So anyone could pick this volunteer model up, basically. Okay, so evolving the program. So doing brilliant stuff in the archive. And a lot of the great ideas out of this came from Adam Corsini, who's now head of collections engagement at the Jewish Museum. Really creative bloke. If you've heard of Archive Lottery, that's his brainchild. And there's things like Archive Lottery I can't even talk about today. I don't have the time. He's brilliant, and he really wanted to take this out of the archive. He was sort of the brains, and I would kind of get it done. I'd have to temper him down sometimes, go, well, how's that going to work practically? This was really important, partly because we knew we could do this work with the public, bearing in mind we're in an archive in North London. Secondly, because we're in what we call the third site, so again, I'm using old terminology, a Museum of London at London Wall, Museum of London Docklands, this was their third London-based site, we were out of sight and out of mind. And it's really important always to promote the archive, keep it going, show what we were doing. And this is a really easy way to do it, to literally put it under the noses of people in the galleries. We'd even invite staff down, we'd invite the director down, say, come on, we're down here, come and see us today. You know, a bit of self-advocacy. So what do? We moved to the Museum of London and we started to train our volunteers in a public-facing role. So they were doing what they're doing in the archive, but now on display. At that time, this is one of the temporary gallery areas at the Museum of London, was Archaeology in Action, so this massively married up, but it didn't really matter what new temporary exhibition went in there, we would pop up. As well as having them on gallery, we sort of you sort of have to internally hire them out. We had several claw learning rooms at the Museum of London. We had those spaces and we invited the visitor. So if you came to a table downstairs, we'd say, hey, at 12 o'clock, do you want to come along? You can do this yourself. And for 20 minutes, 30-minute, 10-minute intro, 20 minutes, they would repack archaeology, having been taught how to do it in 5-10 minutes, to the standards of the archive. So you could literally walk into that museum and contribute to the safe, caring upkeep of London's archaeology. That was our absolute principle here. And we ran loads and loads and loads of these, and anyone could do it. Little people, up to older people, absolutely anyone. And so those are some of the images there. You can see there's the claw centre there. And again, working on these 70s archives for the most part, these legacy archives. So again, it was meaningful, it wasn't tokenistic. Once this was done, in the van, back to the archive, on the shelf, done and dusted. Evolving the programme. So we started to look at what else can we do? At some point, I suppose you run out of legacy archives, or you start on the stuff that was deposited and you thought was up to scratch and start on that. So we started to think, how can we expand this? How are we going to engage people, London's archaeology, just beyond the collections care work? So one was volunteers. So making the archive accessible to new audiences, and you're going to see in a minute how all these ideas come together and start to evolve the programme further. Sustaining our volunteers, if they'd done a bit of packing, if we got them into a public engagement role in the gallery, could they then lead a tour? They absolutely could. These were themed. I can't even remember the themes now. Take any theme you like. There's some London archaeology relating to it. Always a different theme, twice a month, about 90 minutes, and self-led by the two volunteers. A member of staff would be there, but they were doing it. In the bottom left is one of the famous Great Fire of London bricks. So we'd always hand this to people and you would have the dust of 1666 on you. It's an amazing object, just one of the best. We did group training. This is another feature of our training, always group training, even if those volunteers then went on into smaller sub-teams or worked around, but we trained people together. And again, another amazing output of this decade of work was really high levels of training, and we made amazing resources as well, which again, I can't touch on today. Paired together, and they were engaging people with finds and records. So this is another really important point for what I'm talking about. When we worked with these archives, we always include the records as well. It's not just about objects, and that's, so you might have seen some of the earlier pictures, the on-gallery work, we always had records there, site diaries, context sheets, all of that material was rolled into that as well, and you can see sort of some ideas of that on the tour here. We used to think it's really funny so I've moved on, I was working at Colchester Museum, so from a national, semi-national, national museum to a local authority. Now I'm at a trust at the Yorkshire Museum. And I look back and we always thought, can we make some money out of this? So that's income, not profit, but it's not far off, I reckon, profit. And that never seemed like a lot because, of course, that went into the coffers of a national museum. But where I am now, I actually think £4,000 a year, near profit, is fantastic. Bearing in mind we're only running these twice a month. 5 minutes. Wow. Okay, let's go. Okay, so we've got Arts Council money, and this created 4 new roles, and there was a real focus now on creating an additional learning programme as well as a family programme and expanding what Adam and I were doing originally with the VIP programmes for our volunteers. Unearthing Greater London. So archaeology, in a sense, doesn't happen in an archive in Hackney for London. It happens out there, and we have archives from all over Greater London. So we're pushing the model. How can we get our little model we'd created of public engagement, tours in an archive, working on collections? How can we take it out there? So we went to boroughs, and I kicked off the first one down in Hounslow. We went down there and we recruited local volunteers, again, diversifying those sources. We worked on legacy archives. So we took a legacy archive from the central store that related to, let's say, Hounslow, Brentford, and we would get local people to work on it right there. This combination of training, and we were sort of making people archaeological ambassadors by now. We've had this scaffolding approach, so we've also used our central volunteers, if you like, to help us out there. And this was really powerful stuff, that sense of place. We started to increase the reach and size of our venues. So we started to go to places like Tesco's, shopping centres, but then big shopping centres. And this was proper pop-up archaeology. And again, impact could be quite small here or massive. These may be a 1-minute interactions, but some people might stay for 30 minutes in a shopping centre, and a lot of minimal resourcing. You can see here, this is just a little kit we finally got designed, and we would literally just pop up with it, and we took it everywhere. We started to bring the schools and family programs in. Really proud that this program also generated a couple of archive managers. You can see one of them there, I think. And thousands of people basically were engaged through this who wouldn't come to the museum. You'd say, Museum of London, never heard of it, kind of thing. So we were getting it out there. Diversifying the program again. This is sort of my initiative. How do we get away from just collections work? Starting to look at documentation, and could we create volunteers? Could we sort of morph them into artifact specialists? The really quick answer is yes. If you give people enough time and enough training, they can do some really clever stuff. I haven't got time to talk about it. My volunteers documented all the Roman dice in the collection. I think there's about 20 variations of how you can align a Roman dice with its pips. If it's a standard die, i.e. the opposite faces add up to 7, and they worked out the chaîne opératoire of that, which no one had worked out before. Absolutely phenomenal how these things are produced and why we get a different statistical sort of variation in the pips. Really clever stuff. I've got a whiz through learning program. Right, learning program is totally unsung, but it's absolutely amazing. A great focus on primary, really fast growth. The archive wasn't set up to have schools come to it. It wasn't a lunch space. So we invested in that. Up to after 6 years, 10,000 learners a year. It's absolutely phenomenal. And this real combination of real archaeology, real object handling, this archive, using the archive as a sense of place and discovery, and as well as amazing volunteers who had a real place there. It's not heavy numbers of volunteers, but everyone had a role. They weren't just sort of mingling around. They had something to do. And this dynamic contact time really had an effect on the children. So prehistory, Romans and Vikings, really interactive, trying to limit what we might call carpet time. This really appealed to, if you've got movement and century-seeking children, I certainly have got one, that otherwise, you'd have that teacher turn up and they'd almost chaperone them for the session because, they were going to be the challenging one. And we'd just have people say, wow, they've just really reacted to this. They're not, like they are in the classroom because of this hands-on nature. And what's really important here is we were sort of also not in competition with the museum. You're in competition with London. There's so many learning offers out there. And the Museum of London was running 5 to 10 sessions. But this was a really unique session, all about real archaeology, real hands-on, which is what wasn't happening at the Museum of London. They would do Roman sessions, but you weren't doing this, and you weren't really focusing on the archaeology. Very hard to get secondary schools out. If you work with schools, you'll know this. So we went to them. Lots of enrichment, basically, again, using real archives, Billingsgate Bathhouse, the Rose Theatre, using Minecraft in this example to get them to explore and think about this. A-level, same again, but I go back, using a real site, Heathrow Terminal 5, getting them to, I've got to finish, damn, red, okay. I'm going to shoot back one. I'm just going to leave this thought with you, which is, there was some really high quality engagement here. Some light touch, but really meaningful for some. People who said it transformed their life. I don't just think that's a social volunteering thing. I think it's because it had archaeology at the core of it. And I just wonder, what is an archive sort of reason for being, defining its use? If we're not just trying to sort out, say, a storage problem and this obsession with the primary record, can it be something where we can move beyond this passive archive? Those things are there to be researched, and we get to sort of an active centre for I called that Centre for Archaeology at the start, but I've stuck museum in because what was unique about the Lark was it was part of the Museum of London and not just an archive out on its own. So it's a little bit of food for thought, not trying to be too provocative. I'd just like to dedicate this paper to my colleague Steve Tucker, and I want to thank all my former brilliant colleagues at the Museum of London, as it was then. Thank you.